But Karen, you got a collage made for you when you left CEC.
I did. So Karen, who was my EA.
There's not enough Karens around.
I know. So she hid it in Michael, our chief executive's office on the day I was leaving, and Michael got just about fumigated from the amount of glue that was on it. He started to get a headache and feeling dizzy.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Capability Corner. This is the podcast where we explore what's happening in healthcare, workforce development, and capability building. My name is Zoe Yule. I'm head of community at Ausmed, and I am joined. I got them back. I thought they were so good last time that I'm going to have them back, and I am thrilled to introduce you once again to the brilliant Michelle Wiki, Chief Customer Officer at Ausmed, and Dr. Karen Patterson, Chief Nursing Officer at Ausmed. Woo, woo, woo. Welcome back. How are we all this morning?
I'm done. I'm really done. Term 1 has been long. We're not on holidays yet, so it's week 11. I'm really flailing. The kids are done, and work, which is normally my exciting escape, is just getting in the way of me trying to not kill my child. So, maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's good that work is getting in the way of me not killing my child.
Keep working,
so good.
Michelle.
Yeah, great. Okay, I'll keep that up.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are done right now. We had a webinar this week. We had a really great registration. We had 450 or something people register.
And 40 turned up.
And 40 turned up. We had about 160 or so turn up.
That's great.
It was good. Very, very grateful. Thanks, everyone, for coming. You were out on the town yesterday, Michelle, or on Tuesday.
I was Ausmed Uber. Yep.
I was
taking, are we allowed to say, like, our champion of champions around Sydney town? Yeah, Michael, otherwise known as Mo.
Michael Olorenshaw.
Oh, are we allowed to talk last names?
He's on LinkedIn. I'm sure you can find out his name.
So picked him up from Sydney Airport. Had a little bit of I missed, for those Sydney-siders, I was trying to go into the Uber pickup section. Like, you can go in there. It's not allowed at the normal section, but there's only one lane. And if you get it wrong, you're back in Zetland kind of thing before you got to go back again. So thanks for those following along in Sydney. Anyway, so I missed my turn, and then I had to go back into Zetland and do a little bit of a U-in and then go back and get him. But anyway, picked him up. That was great. But anyway, we went out to a prospect and had a great meeting, talked to them. They were super excited. And in classic Wiki fashion, I finished the meeting by talking about how we like to deal with our customers. And I said, didn't even think about it, just said, so the point here is that we're here for a marriage, not a hookup. And Michael's just like, God, Wiki, every time I can't take you anywhere.
And that is why you work with our customers.
I know.
And
six out of
not
6
the new
people
business unit.
6 out of 6 people were laughing. 6 out of 6. I nailed 100% laugh rate on my joke. So I think it was safe.
Great metric.
I think it was fine, yeah. I mean, Tanya's called me into her office again, but other than that, it was fine. Yeah.
That sounds like you've had a great week.
That's why I missed the webinar.
Yeah.
So I was busy making an inappropriate joke to future customers.
That's it. There you go. That's it. That's a great reason.
Were you at you were running the webinar,
Karen, I was at the webinar, and it's always fantastic to join Zoe. And Robbie did his magic around the Ausmed Perform, which I think builds on from our conversation last week previously around triangulation and how to use data in a way to visualize and be able to, just get a really good sense of the effectiveness of, all the work that you're doing. How do you get some outcomes from it? So it was really
great.
Good.
Do you think that we use the word triangulation because it's the only shape that the word works? It's like square
and onomatopoeia. Is that what you mean?
Well, I went into the facility and I had to hexagonalize the data points, or I had to circulify. Oh, I guess circle back, but that's a bit boring.
Different meaning.
I use triangulation as a concept rather than as a number. So, I don't actually even think about numbers because there's many different moving parts. Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's my part from there. Is triangulation is about how do you actually bring it together to move it from data points to intelligence. So
So you're not thinking I need 3 points and I need to connect them. You're
You're like a
bringing it all together.
metaphorical triangle, like a
I'm looking for
metaphorical triangle.
patterns. I'm looking for what it tells me, and and triangulation is just a way. It's like more of a Tetris type thing.
You're
It's more about
you're
moving.
here, Karen. You're
Yeah.
here, and I'm here.
No.
Yeah,
I'm on like I can remember 3 things right now. Well, I was just going to shout out, Karen, you had a big achievement this week. You sent off the grant application.
Yes.
Woo! That was massive.
Yeah, no, very exciting, and so we will see where that will land us, but I think we're very well placed. It was fantastic, the team we've got across I don't know if we can say the facilities or the organisations that we're working with, but across an aged care provider, a research organisation ourselves, to do a demonstration trial of a really fun and innovative model of engagement with reflective practice that can happen via an AI-driven process. So I think it's going to be a game changer. I'm really
excited. I'm excited too.
And I think the money will be great, but doing it will be better.
I love it. We're
Money's
doing it
always
anyway.
great.
Money helps.
Money helps.
Money helps.
With research. Money will help us to be able to publish it so other people can learn, because otherwise we'll keep advancing. You guys are just always advancing from there. But how do we take everyone with us? And that's why we need to publish, and that's where the research will be good, because that then brings it into that wider arena from there.
Fantastic. And
matches the value of generosity, I think, from there. So generosity in that everyone doesn't have to fall down the same hole. Like everyone can learn from each other and jump on each other's shoulders. So
absolutely. And I love your mantra, Karen. You don't like to duplicate. If one person's doing it, like, let's get everyone on board. Why would everyone try and do the same thing? It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense.
Anyway, I think we'll come back to reflective for practice. We'll keep everyone posted with the grant. But today's deep dive is, we have done no prep, full disclaimer, but let's hear the raw version of what do we think about mandatory training. I've said it. I've said the
excited.
word.
Yeah.
Do we love it? Do we like it? What do we think? Friend, foe, something in between?
Friend or foe?
Is it just tick box? Is it actually meaningful? Can we make it meaningful? Does it build capability? Who wants to go first?
Look, I don't want to ruin my rant later, right? It's all about mental training. So I've got to be really careful. I've got to try and bring some more unique points to this conversation. But what do I think? I just think it's like I want to say fundamental, but it's just like the groundwork. Like it's you have to pull your underpants on every day. Like that's just what you do. Well, I mean, you don't, because that's a social convention. You don't have to wear underpants if you don't want to. But I think most of us do. The underwear industry would tell me that there's a strong underpant wearing presence in our community.
Well, I will jump in and say my child got his father got him ready for the day yesterday and took him to the grandparents. And when I picked the child up, she said he didn't even have underpants on. So he's wearing shorts on a 16-degree day.
Yeah, good.
And I said it wasn't me that got him ready this morning.
Social no. Yeah. And the paediatrician that I used when we were exploring why our third child would not put underpants on no matter what, they said it's a social convention. We don't care. Don't wear underpants. It's not a problem. So except for mandatory training, which if you don't do mandatory training, it probably will be if you don't do it, it'll be a problem. Absolutely. That's actually how I feel. If you don't do it, it will be a problem. We are not at a point with regulations where we can stop wearing our mandatory training. For those people that do wear underwear, it's a bit like underwear. Just put it on, got to do it first, and then you can accentuate. That's what I think of when I think mandatory training. Underpants. Karen, can you want to take it up? So I'm here.
Go up a notch.
Take it up a notch.
No, I didn't. Like underpants is a whole different thinking. So, but I think it is about what lies beneath. So that could be something that brings it in together. The first thought that came to mind was about herd immunity. So really, mandatory training is just, if we want to use our beautiful friend COVID as an example from there, it was, a bit like, how do we make assurance that we can maximise the chance of safety for the many? And so mandatory training is, I think, something that is very old school in thinking. I think I believe in the concept of really understanding what's important and, what is the legislation, regulation, etc., what impacts on safety and quality, and really saying this is an essential or critical skill or knowledge that people need to have. The bit about the training, I'm less hooked on, because if you've ever tried to train a human,
Three of them,
highly unlikely, because humans aren't designed to be trained. And it is about, how do we take it from being something that is in isolation of context, because a lot of the time mandatory training is about reading something and saying because they've read it, they know it. And we know from a capability building that's more of a ticker box. The other part that I'm fascinated by, and this is linked to a few things that we do in health, is that there isn't actually any evidence that really supports that it's effective. So our measure of effectiveness is that the box is ticked. So it's about completion.
Completion rates. They're the obsession
that's
point.
Measure of success. And so if we come back to our good friend triangulation again and thinking about, well, okay, what would be a measure? Like, how do we measure our, relationship to safety outcomes, to performance, to experience and parts from there? And what is the relationship between the process of improving knowledge or building skill to making outcomes from there? So I think mandatory training is one of those things that isn't outcome driven, and it served its time well in the historical world of health. But moving forward and moving into an outcome focused view of health, and also the complexity of humans working in a whole range of contexts, because mandatory training assumes that everyone is working under the same conditions in the same environment as well. And as we know,
not the case.
Yeah. And like, health keeps evolving at a pace that we can't keep up with, and a lot of it's virtual now as well. And how do we teach some of the principles in a way, and what is the significance for someone and who is perhaps working virtually and never actually touches someone, the importance of hand washing and infection control and parts from there for that person as a mandatory training? Or is there other things which are around respectful communication and parts from there that should be
mandatory? Yeah,
weighted from there. So
I want to go back to something you said, Karen. I think you said there's no evidence that mandatory training is effective. So why are we doing it? Why are we doing something that we've always done if it's not actually effective, if there's no evidence? Can you imagine if we kept giving oxygen, 10 litres a minute oxygen in chest pain, when the evidence shows that you get oxygen toxicity and it is not necessary to give oxygen at that level? Can you imagine if we'd be up in front of the nursing midwifery board? So why are we still doing mandatory training if the evidence doesn't support it?
The amount of money and time that goes into mandatory training, one, in the development of the mandatory training, and two, in regard to the people who have to sit and consume it. It is quite, if you're looking at value-based healthcare and thinking around where do we invest to get the best outcomes, where is waste and what is effectiveness, I do think that it really is an area for further review, and really it just comes from being risk averse. And as I said before, that herd immunity, which from a public health philosophy, if you look at the theory behind that, when you've got a large group of diverse people, what gives you the greatest assurance? Well, you expose them all to the same thing. And yes, there are some skills which are critical that everyone needs to be exposed to, and obviously the legislation and regulation from there impose that. But does it show up in practice? Like, that's the missing part. There are all the investments in that front end. So we focus all of our money and all of our time in that mandatory training, and then we say, okay, you go.
You're good
From
now.
there, and it's not
Yeah.
linked into
We'll
their
see you in another year.
workplace assessments. It's not part of their performance review to, provide me a reflection on how, working, from say just cybersecurity as an example from some of the training that's been mandatory, tell me how that's turned up in your practice.
Yeah.
How that was helpful for you. None of that happens. It's just done once and forgotten.
I think you asked a really good question, Zoe. We're like, why is it still done? And I'm going to be really harsh about it because the bloody regulators don't know or aren't bold enough to think of anything different or more innovative. They are living in where we've been at historically, thinking that that is the answer, and they don't want to delve into either something new that they've got to learn how to trust or something, clearer around an evidence base, but also at a wider, and this is like big call, Michelle Wiki, at a wider view, like the education system in general is moving too slow, way too slow. Why do a year 3 child come home this week and say, I'm learning cursive writing? I don't give a bloody hoot that my year 3 kid is learning how to do running writing. Why are we teaching running writing now? I would much prefer you to put them in front of a computer and say, here's touch typing.
Touch typing.
You know how to learn. You can print and now touch type. When was the last time I did running writing? The point I'm trying to make is I do think, big call, that the education and curriculum system at a whole is staying in an archaic place and is not being progressive enough and
so
keeping
much
up
is
with where we're
changing.
at. And that includes the application of education in institutions like a commission or a HCCC, or the NS. I'm never good with the acronyms. NSQHS, blah blah blah. You know my point. The regulator boards and their education is moving at a snail's pace along with the same entire public education system. And so we are still locked in this prove mandatory training BS when actually we should be looking at results, outcomes and evidence. And that's why it's this waste of time that Karen's essentially talking about.
Yeah, I think there's a few things I pick up on. One, let's come back to the word risk, because I know, Michelle, when you talk to our customers, you talk about different risk appetites. People are doing mandatory training still.
Yeah, for sure.
That's the reality. It's happening.
Yep.
And you talk about different appetites of risk. How does an organisation's risk appetite show up in mandatory training?
Healthcare organisation A has a really low risk tolerance. They don't want any risk at all. So they assign 15, maybe they assign 25 modules in their annual mandatory training plan. And that can include, and I'm going to use an aged care example, I'm really sorry, but that would be where you start to see duplicates like SIRS module and elder abuse module. And the reason I'm calling those duplicates is because in the aged care scenario and in the module makeup I'm referencing, SIRS is about anything, any incidents that require reporting. Elder abuse is about those actions or behaviours, but not about the reporting of them. But SIRS will cover both, right? So risk intolerant organisation A puts elder abuse and SIRS and is now spending an hour and a half on the same item. Organisation B has a higher tolerance to risk and thinks, no, I'm going to weigh up my cost with my risk, and I'm going to say that I don't need to over-educate on serious incidences in aged care. So I'm only going to put SIRS in my mandatory training, and I end up having 11 modules, not 25 modules, because I've taken out anything that's a bit duplicate. Another example would be hand hygiene essentials versus infection control. Infection control will cover hand hygiene.
Yeah. Are they using what they aren't investing in the mandatory training then to look at the work environment and different ways of engaging people in learning?
I mean, the short answer is I would like to say yes, but not necessarily. No, they're just saving money under the learning premise and taking the chance.
That's the risk, isn't it?
So but they have lower risk tolerance. So they're higher risk tolerance. So they're happy to take that chance because they're saving money in other ways, and maybe they're spending it, maybe they're not spending it. Yeah. But I think when you look at face value, the modules they're inputting, one is doubling up or tripling up or duplicating on items because they think that the more content I've got and the broader the content I've got, then the less chance I'm going to have those incidences. Yeah. What I would really like to see is an entire industry change, and this has to be made by the regulators. That's really where I think this should be happening, or it's going to have to be made by organisations that are willing to try and fight when they're sanctioned or given unmets. But I would like to see mandatory training that is only assigned when they have a 20 or 30% increase to the clinical indicator or a drop, whichever way is the correct version. But you see a significant move of poor performance and then boom, we take corrective action. Now, I know that's not proactive, but there are still some cases where if you assign 25 items, that's really proactive, good for you, but you're also spending a lot of time, learning burden, tiring, not respecting knowledge base.
And
I think we need a balance between
Michelle,
the two.
That's like a maturity curve as well. So I agree from there. So in the first instance, you can start from a baseline to say, I need to feel assured that everyone's been exposed to this content. Yeah. But then it's about the overtime part, which is where I think we lose a lot of our workforce from, is that they have to keep doing it.
I agree. I think in an induction plan, like you need to like if someone new enters your workforce, foundations, like get that basic done.
Yeah.
Tick that box, make it as engaging as you possibly can, and then address as a needs basis. Yeah.
And if we come back to football, it's the rules of the game. So the thing is, you know the rules of the game. And if you have assurance that everyone knows the rules of the game, but then when something goes wrong, or if there's a non-compliance or something from there's an over-reliance on, well, let's just train more. Let's just get out the back and kick the ball
Which I think
more.
does a disservice to brand education, right? And education doesn't fare well. When education is used inappropriately, call the educator, call L&D, hey, this has happened, we need you to go and fix it. Yeah. When is it actually an education problem? Is there actually a gap in knowledge, skill or practice? Or actually is a policy out of date? Or they don't have a particular product that's needed?
Yeah. And are the structures and processes in place that enable people to enact what they've learnt through their mandatory training? So, this comes down to looking at rostering, skill mix, accessibility and availability of equipment, location. There's all of these other factors and, many more as being humans as well. And that's where it wasn't psychologically safe, what was happening at the time. So when something goes wrong, there are many factors, and we do tend to lean towards, because it is easier to manage, to say, well, let's just train. I'll feel better because, I'm the chief executive. So I'll feel better if I know that everyone's done this module. And it's based on a feeling. It's not based on data, and it's not based on outcomes, and it's not based on how that makes the staff feel. And the people who, perhaps from the receivers of care. So I do think that there is the risk around also from that sort of scenario is that people don't speak up either. So they might actually, there's a whole lot of workarounds that happen in the workplace. So as far as, going out, people will observe people. They know what the policy is. They know what they've learnt through mandatory training, and then they observe people doing different practices. Through that then, but they don't actually know, because no one talks about it, they don't actually know why the person who's probably an expert and highly experienced in that context and field, so they're following, because there is no follow-up from mandatory training, they are actually following the policy in a way that for a novice coming in, they can't pick up all the cues as to what's going on. So then they just mirror or mimic the practice, and something goes terribly wrong. But no one, and the thing around that is that people don't speak up about, and they are afraid to say, well, this doesn't work in practice, so we need to look at a different way of doing it. They just work out how to do it.
My problem, Karen, is there are no bloody rules. They do not have a rule book. They do not say if you have hand hygiene, infection control, elder abuse, SIRS, whatever, then you're fine, or then you're acceptable, or this is the benchmark. We're working with no rule book, and that makes the mandatory training really susceptible to the spray and pray. Let's put as much in as possible, because we actually don't know what's being asked of us, and we're not being empowered to run against are outcomes only. So then we feel like we've got to overload this fundamental or foundational element of background training or underwear
I'm
training.
going to do a quick response, Zoe. And one of the rules that is there is the 10-20-70 rule from there about adult learning in a workplace environment. So looking at 10% being formal, 20% being its application within a social process, mentoring, coaching, facilitation, and the 70% is in context in the workplace. So we still focus all of our training effort in that 10%. And in that 10% is that formal training process, knowing that we are an applied learning profession from there, working in a context that's dynamic and changing. And so really what we need to know, yes, we need to know they've got the knowledge and skills, but then what we need to know more is that they can apply them in the context of what is happening in that moment for that person and the person they're caring with. So I do think we do have, some parts from there, but like you said from the very beginning, Michelle, it is around the views around education and traditional, still caught up in that traditional part of learning, where that sort of adopting more the 10-20-70 would just be a very simple way of looking at, well, how do we help a human to learn?
I'm going to direct your last word, Michelle, into I know you're gonna come up with something like this anyway. Practical. If people are going to work next week and they're about to create a mandatory training plan, I don't know. What's one thing they can do differently?
I don't know. I don't know anymore, Zoe.
You're
I
meant
give
to
up.
know. All right.
What can they do about their mandatory training? What practically can they apply?
Well, what can they change?
I wanna say,
people
be
are
bold.
inspired. They want to.
Their hands are
can they
tied.
do different?
Everyone's scared. They can't do anything different. What I want to say is, if you could be a maverick about it, wipe the entire slate clean and say, what was our worst performing clinical indicator? That's what we're working on for the next 2 months. And that's all we're working on for the next 2 months. Everything else will take care of itself because we've done it over and over. That's what I'd like to encourage people to do. But I know they can't. Hands are tied. Board members won't let them. Senior leaders won't let them. Industry won't let them. It's very hard.
Love it. Look, perfect segue for me to say, and I think I can say this, but I better be careful with how much I say, I guess, that I know something Ausmed in particular, Will, our CEO, is very passionate about, and talking to some really great people in our key sectors about, is at that regulatory pointy end and trying to change that regulation to say, let's not audit on completion, let's audit on capability, let's audit on outcomes. So yes, that might be 5 years away. We've just had we're just about to have new aged care standards go live. So it could be a little while, but that is what we are trying to enact, that change at now, here, grassroots level. When you go to work, try and take this approach and do things a bit differently, but also right through to at the regulatory level, how do we change the way the system is audited to then look at what matters? All right, plenty to think about on mandatory training. Hopefully a couple of new ideas. We will put the link to a webinar that we did last year. It was all about mandatory training best practices. That's just scratching the surface. The toolbox items, the articles. Michelle, you've been an amazing contributor to things like, rethinking our obsession with time and mandatory training. So if that got your juices going, fabulous. We'll put some links to some other resources on the topic. But drum roll, we have everyone's favourite section about to begin. Well, actually, I should say, do we want to call this Wiki's Rants?
Oh,
I
yeah.
love that, but have we prematurely jumped on? What do you want to call this section? It's Michelle's Madness, Wiki's Rants.
Austin dared to say that we could call it WikiLeaks, but I mean, that's really hurtful. I've worked really hard to not leak, all right? So I'm just putting it out there. That's hurtful. Wiki's whinge, Wiki's workforce woes. Jeez. I don't know. We'll take a poll. Someone email in, let us know. Yeah,
Love
we'll
it.
poll it out and see what happens.
Sounds good.
But I'm going to just launch into my rant today.
Go for it.
I do like the educational value of learning, but we need to work out how to apply it. We need to care about safety. We need to care about ethics. We need to care about clinical excellence, but we do want to kill off this checkbox culture that I've done, and I don't know how to do it until we keep challenging the regulators or keep challenging the accreditation process. We're not going to get a better outcome. So I don't know, I was going to go helpful, but really the fact is I should just rant about it. Can we just wipe mandatory training altogether? Can we set in place an induction plan that locks in the what you do before you join, which is what everyone will have to do. We all accept that. But then after that, forget about this annual refresher. Forget about this, I've got to do it 1 year because I did it last year and I've got to do it every year, and actually work out that job role against that cohort of patients or clients or customers or consumers that they're caring for, and then what is relevant because of what their prevalent or high prevalent needs are in that moment. That would be the best version, and it would save time, and we wouldn't have to worry about risk because we actually are targeting where the risk is. That's it. I'm done. Mark is
That
complete.
was a
Done.
3-minute whinge rant. Yeah.
It was not. Oh, God.
In taking on what Michelle was ranting about from there, I probably agree but disagree. I think being clear about what is mandatory is important.
Please.
And
clear then.
It's the rest from there. And that's the part which we've taken the easy route because we've got such a messy context and people die on our watch. So we've got high risks happening from there.
Do you think people are dying because of the lack of mandatory training, though, or the inappropriate
it's a combination
adherence?
of things, and that's the part which we don't really understand. And that's the whole part of the root cause of looking at what happened and why things go wrong. There are so many moving pieces. I do think if we're going to look at interprofessional teams, having a standardized skill set and parts from there is really important. I think that most people who come into healthcare come through an education pathway of some way. If there was more of an interdiscipline curriculum from there so that you knew that everyone was getting the same principles, biased from working in safety and quality, we had such a huge variation in regard to what people were exposed to, and particularly from our medical colleagues, and that because they were so busy in trying to cram into an already overpacked curriculum, some of the things just don't make the cut. And so who determines that, and how does that, and that opens a whole can of worms.
Absolutely. You can't talk about it. Sorry, no, continue, Karen.
But I think that, Zoe, that's also interesting is about what can we and can't we talk about, because that comes back to that psychological safety and that space. Are we really open to learning as an organisation, as a system, if we really don't know what we can and we can't say and who and we can and we can't say it to? So I think a really practical thing that can happen on the floor tomorrow is from a healthcare worker and from their team leader, manager's perspective, is just creating that space to understand, tell me what's working here. Tell me what's getting in your way. Let's have a look at how, as Michelle was saying, from our outcomes, and let's work backwards and go, okay, what are the things that have contributed to getting there? And what is it that perhaps we don't know that we need to know better? And
love it.
Rather than starting from, the part which is about I just feel that the mandatory training part of it is eroding trust between the staff and the workforce and the managers and the board, rather than building trust. And we know that building trust is the critical ingredient for a learning organisation.
Love it. So I want to just mention a few kind of honestly really great articles, if I can be biased and say that are just about to go live or will be live on the toolbox. We have psychological safety from the legal perspective, so looking at those OHS changes that were introduced, but also from the human perspective. Karen, you've written some great stuff for us lately. I'm really, really loving your contributions, thinking about how does the board demonstrate workforce capability. Workforce capability, everyone's business. We all got to get behind it. The other thing I guess I wanted to share is that we talked about, the value of education. We've got an article coming live soon around the value of storytelling in education. And I think you can't have a conversation about mandatory training without thinking about, well, what are some of the other impactful, interesting, relevant ways of learning and stories. You know, we all love stories. There's a lot of benefit in doing things a bit differently. So there's a few resources to check out. Lots happening, lots being published. All right, so that's it for today's episode of Capability Corner. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Karen. Thank you,
We're
listeners.
firing today. Were we firing today?
I hope we were firing.
I think we're fired,
Yeah.
and then I feel like I plateaued, and then
You started thinking, Michelle. You should not start thinking.
She might have also checked her emails.
no emails today.
No emails. Love it. All right, we're done. That's our cue. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us for today's episode of the Capability Corner. If you have a hot topic, if you have feedback, thoughts, feelings, concerns, if you love it, drop us a line. You can email us at podcasts@ausmed.com.au. Follow us on LinkedIn. We do publish a lot of our new posts and articles on there. Subscribe to the L&D Toolbox so you don't miss any of those resources I shared. And we look forward to having you join us for our next episode of the Capability Corner. Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Karen.
Cheers. Have a good one, folks. Have a good Easter. Oh, this might be out after Easter. Hope you had a good Easter.
Thank you.
Bye.